Sustainable Futures at the University of Manchester brings together the unique depth and breadth of our internationally leading research to produce truly sustainable solutions to urgent environmental challenges. Sustainable Futures will integrate an unprecedented range of environmental expertise from across the university to facilitate highly interdisciplinary research and impact. Sustainable Futures is arranged around a number of interconnected challenge areas. Resilient Futures, fulfilling societal functions in the face of disruptive environmental change whilst ensuring our natural environments are protected, restored and sustained. Resourceful Futures, providing for human needs in ways that sustainably manage finite resources. Net Zero Futures, delivering rapid emissions reductions and enhancing our ability to remove and store carbon. Healthy Futures, managing risks to humans and ecosystems and realising the benefits of transitioning to an environmentally sustainable future. Inclusive and Prosperous Futures, delivering environmental sustainability through a just transition that enables communities to thrive. Sustainable Futures is part of the university's social responsibility commitment to action, which includes research with impact, socially responsible graduates, responsible organisational processes and engaging our communities. University of Manchester experts are helping to build a greener, fairer and healthier future for all. Interdisciplinary collaborations, cross-sector partnerships and pioneering discoveries benefit the environment, the economy, health, well-being and culture on a local, national and international scale. Welcome to Sustainable Futures at the University of Manchester. Join us to help deliver solutions to urgent environmental challenges.
Let me just say a few words of introduction before I hand over to others. Sustainable Futures is really, really important to the university. We've all come through an incredibly difficult time, perhaps not quite through it yet, over COVID. It's hit us very hard. COVID is nothing compared to the challenges of environmental change and sustainability. It pales into insignificance compared to those sorts of challenges we face as a whole globe. And I think it's something that I'm really pleased that we are committed to as a cross-university platform, along with several others, Digital Futures, Creative Manchester, Policy at Manchester. We have huge strengths in this, but they've been dispersed. They've been in little pockets around the university. Obviously, our Tyndall Centre, which is fantastic, sustainable materials, our energy beacon, many others. But we also have great strengths in social sciences, in the business school, in other parts of the university. And we are therefore trying to bring these together for mutual benefit. We're looking at how we can soon potentially offer some modest additional funding for it, and how we can also garner those to really deliver change. I'm very proud, of course, that social responsibility, of which this is a part, although it's much bigger than just being that, is something important to us, and that we came top in the world in the THE social impact under the Sustainable Development Goals. But if we're going to maintain and enhance that, then we're going to have to do even more. And Sustainable Futures is a key part of that. Obviously, we're coming up to COP26, and I'm very pleased that we'll have 9 of our researchers will attend to engage with governments, businesses, and so on. We've appointed a director for Sustainable Futures, Mike Shaver, who you'll be hearing from in a few moments. And I'm also delighted that we have Mark Catherton, Director of Environment at Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who's going to talk about the Greater Manchester perspective. And here, of course, Greater Manchester has been bold. It's set itself a target of net zero much before the government target. And we as a university have followed that target and also set that for ourselves. It will be challenging, it will be expensive, it will be difficult, but I think that commitment is exactly the right one. So I'm very proud of Sustainable Futures. It needs to grow, it needs to involve more people, it needs to get further funding, and it really needs to deliver outcomes for what is the biggest challenge society has ever faced. So thank you for being at this event, and I think now I hand over to Mark.
Thank you, Dame Nancy, and good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Catherton. I'm Director of Environment for Greater Manchester Combined Authority. As you probably know, Greater Manchester Combined Authority brings together the 10 local authorities of Greater Manchester with an elected mayor. And what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is Greater Manchester's perspective on our path to sustainability. I'm hoping that you can see those slides. I'm just get a thumbs up. Can you see those?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm only really going to speak for 5 minutes or so, and I really wanted to emphasize a few things. The first is that we already have a very strong relationship with University of Manchester, I'm very pleased to say. And some of the things that you've just seen in the video and some of the things that Dame Nancy's just explained, I think are already happening really well within Greater Manchester, and obviously understand that the Sustainable Futures platform is the university's window to the world, and it's not just a Greater Manchester focus, but starting at home is always a good place. And I'm really pleased to say I think we've got a strong foundation. So the first thing I really want to talk about is the breadth of Greater Manchester's ambition. This is an infographic that we're currently using for the version of Greater Manchester's economic strategy, the wider economic strategy. And you can see that the key principle is trying to create Greater Manchester into the best place that people can grow up and grow old. And only one of these elements is about environment. But given that the rest of my presentation today is going to be largely about environmental sustainability, I wanted to make the point that we need to look for the co-benefits of delivering natural environment and indeed carbon and environmental sustainability benefits that link in with wider socio-economic impact. Because as the Mayor would say, levelling up is certainly not done. And one of the aspirations that we have as a combined authority is to ensure that whilst we're creating a place that people can be proud of to live, work and play, that's not just about the environmental quality, it's obviously about creating good life chances, creating productive businesses, creating an economy that can sustain future well-being. And that's certainly where the Greater Manchester strategy lies. I'm also pleased to say that the next iteration of the Greater Manchester strategy, which we're about to refresh now, is being supported by University of Manchester. They're providing support and challenge to ensure that we're keeping to that ethos. The 5-year environment plan was launched 2 years ago, and it follows the same sort of pattern. So we've identified the 5 environmental threats that face Greater Manchester, everything from climate change mitigation to adaptation, and picking up sustainable consumption of resources and natural environment as well as air quality. But importantly, we look at them through the lens of people, place and economy. So we look at how we can improve people's health and well-being. We look at how we can create vibrant places for people to live and work. And we look at how we can support our businesses to create not just first mover advantage, but to create sustainable business models and circular business models of the future. This is to try and ensure that our businesses are de-risked in some way and are prepared for a future that will certainly be low in use of organic fuels. This is a plan on a page for the 5-year environment plan. The themes are across the top, the key priorities are in the columns. Again, I won't go through the detail, but the point I wanted to make is the interrelationships between these key priorities. Dame Nancy talked about interdisciplinary research, and I think this is where, or why interdisciplinary research is absolutely key. Because as you're delivering natural environment improvement, you can do so not just so that it will improve climate resilience, but also that it will reduce the carbon emissions that we have within our buildings by promoting things like green walls and green roofs. As we look at our transport carbon emissions, we can decarbonise those and try and improve the biodiversity at the same time by creating cycle paths that are rich in flora and fauna. So the key point here is about the need for interdisciplinary research, and so a real opportunity for the platform to succeed. The graph on the left-hand side will be familiar to most of you, I think. It was produced by the Tyndall Centre for us, and it's, as Dame Nancy said, it's the underlying base of our carbon neutral by 2038 target. So where we need to get to is basically to keep within a budget which keeps us underneath the blue curve, and that's really challenging. The orange line graph shows that we are currently above our target. We're about 8.3 million tonnes above our target, which means that we've already used next year's emissions. But we do have a very strong partnership within Greater Manchester that will help us to try and overcome some of these challenges. So we've adopted a mission-based approach where you set a big, hairy, audacious goal, break it down to challenge groups. And in each of the challenge groups that we've set up that are working on a 6-weekly basis, there is a strong representation from University of Manchester and of the Greater Manchester University academics. And so there's a real opportunity and a mechanism for us to convene and bring together policymakers with academics, with business leaders, to try and identify the solutions to some of the barriers that we need to overcome. One of the real examples of doing so is the Energy Innovation Agency, which was soft launched last year at the Green Summit. And we've just appointed a director and business development manager. So we're starting to create the ability to be able to get the centre underway. The Energy Innovation Agency brings together the expertise and funding from Greater Manchester's three largest universities, obviously the University of Manchester, but also Salford and Manchester Metropolitan, with the funding and expertise of some private sector business partners and the wider public sector in Greater Manchester. And the aim of the Energy Innovation Centre is similar in some ways to the platform. It is to create an open door for business, to try and support them in innovating, particularly bleeding edge technologies that will help us to reduce our carbon emissions as quickly as possible. The idea is that it will link into some of the world-class research that the universities have to offer, provided with the finance that the private sector and business cases the private sector can bring to bear, and unlock some of the policy operations that the public sector and wider business support offers are available. So the Energy Innovation Agency is a real embodiment of what a sustainability platform is trying to do. And we need to do this in a systemic way. We're focusing very much on decarbonising heat from our buildings and our transport. And just to give you an idea of some of the progress that's been made, we are developing local energy plans to try at almost a district by district level, understand what the energy transition will need to be between now and 2038 if we're going to hit our carbon neutral target. Plans can always seem less than sexy, but actually, if you're going to plan a way to reduce our emissions, then I believe that as you get a more decentralized and decarbonised energy system, the interrelationship between energy, transport, and physical system, built infrastructure becomes ever more important and ever more interrelated. So it's how do you bring together the opportunities to both generate energy and utilise energy in the smartest possible way. And that's what we're aiming to do through local energy plans. In effect, the point of this slide is that it's all based on the best available data. So another important role for universities, in my view, is to help us bring together and understand and interpret data in a way which is useful in informing science-led policy. And that's what we're doing through the local energy plans. But almost on a street-by-street level, we know now what the opportunities are for decarbonising our buildings. We understand where the potential for electric vehicle charging is likely to be. And we started to identify sites where we can generate more low-carbon energy. And by mapping these out, we can understand what the energy infrastructure is likely to be in the future, and that will help us to inform planning policy. So we've gone right the way through from having really robust data and utilising that data to deliver public policy. On the natural environment side, it's a very similar picture. We look at how we've used University of Manchester data sets actually to look at how we can use nature-based solutions to both develop our adaptation and resilience to city region, but also to produce one of the UK's first local nature recovery strategies. And it focuses not just on biodiversity, but also managing our water, our land and our air more sustainably. One of the largest projects that's helping us to do this is the Ignition project, which is University of Manchester as a partner. And in effect, it brings together another element of the complexity of this journey. We can come up with good ideas, but really we need to find out how to finance them. And the Ignition project is really looking at how we can create investable propositions to increase the amount of nature-based solutions that we can build into the city region to increase our resilience. And doing that through a Greater Manchester Environment Fund, which is the UK first in linking together unrestricted donations with restricted income. So I wanted to bring this all together, this is my final slide, and say that in my view, the challenges that we have as a city region, you could view almost as a really complex action research inquiry. We need to look at the science, certainly, but you need to blend in with the science the idea of how you can create change and make that happen. And it really is a study in complexity. We are trying to manage the unmanageable, know the unknowable, and control the uncontrollable. In this element, I think universities have a really, really strong role to play. It's not just about understanding how we can connect all of these things, but it's how do we create systems that are producing an educational system which are producing people who are qualified and able to go into the jobs of the future and create the system that we're trying to see as being the future for Greater Manchester. So the university has an overarching role to help us with making sure our data is robust, interpreting that data, looking at how we can undertake research through the Royce Institute and the SCI Institute, particularly looking at how we create embedded systems to look at reduction or embedded energy. But importantly, it's also about creating learners who are educated to a standard that are able to drive forward this initiative in the future.
Hi, thanks so much, Mark, for that perspective on Greater Manchester. And I think what's really interesting is how complex the situation is when you just look at the city region. And of course, we realize that this is a real global challenge, and this is where Sustainable Futures comes in. So I'm Mike Shaver. I'm director of the Sustainable Futures platform. And I just want to start by thanking you all for coming to this external launch event. This new research platform is a bit of a celebration. We've already been doing a lot of good things, but it's an ambition. It's a recognition that while we already have world-leading thinking and world-leading efforts in tackling, and importantly, helping other organizations tackle these global challenges in environmental sustainability, it is also a recognition that the urgency and the complexity of these challenges continue. And we have an opportunity to grow our local and global leadership in trying to transform the world for better. So it's a real honor to serve as the inaugural director of Sustainable Futures. I think technically I've been in the job for -2 weeks. So I'm actually going to formally take up the post in November, but excited to have the opportunity to chat to you a little bit earlier than that here today. But this is not really me. This is a recognition that we have a community of researchers and a lot of those parent institutes that have been developing this platform for quite a long time. And what I can tell you from those early conversations is that it's hard to do right. The challenges of environmental sustainability we face are necessarily interdisciplinary, and they often have unintended consequences. And so a solution in one space might actually have a problem that is created in another. And our individual and organizational ways of working, managing, and resourcing means that we have big variations in the purpose, the practice, the perspective that are all magnified when we move beyond environmental sustainability and look at how economic and social value are also considered. So Sustainable Futures, what is it? Well, it needs to, and it indeed will, create value, impact, and cohesion from our research efforts in environmental sustainability. It's also going to serve as a lens through which our diverse stakeholders in industry, in academia, in government, in community, in alumni may view us, may value us, and may invest in us. And so the urgency of environmental sustainability challenges require us to work together to develop these disruptive but actionable solutions. And so the Sustainable Futures platform can hopefully magnify these challenges, broaden our scope, but more importantly, understand the interdependence of these potential solutions. So how do we work together so that actions work for a diverse array of stakeholders who may measure this value in a different way and over different timescales? So our success in trying to deliver social and environmental impact is bringing more focus on our efforts. And this is a great thing. We want to be judged on our performance here, but we have now a chance to really make a difference by aligning all of this different activity that we have going on. So we start from a fantastic foundation, and we're going to build on this community, more aptly probably a family of connected communities with an aligned and a clearly defined vision, and importantly, a vision that incites change in our partners and celebrates our success. It's impossible to do this on your own. This is always going to be one of these team efforts that the University of Manchester is really good at. And the vision for Sustainable Futures was built by what has been called the Trailblazing Group. And really, it's a group of exceptionally talented and passionate people who I depend a lot upon for my knowledge of these various different areas. You're going to hear from a few of them today, but I just wanted to say thanks to Profs. Carly Mclaughlin, James Evans, Hugh Coe, Jonathan Pinske, and Frank Boons, who all put in a massive effort just to get us to this point. We have already conducted quite a lot of broader consultations, and this has helped us to define what we call challenge areas. So this is not a thematic area of research, but actually a goal, a target, things we want to solve. You saw those in the video earlier, but I just want to reiterate what are those questions that we're asking. And the first is resilient futures. So we're faced with an increasing amount of disruptive environmental change. How do we build a more resilient society while ensuring our natural environments are protected, restored, and sustained? The second is resourceful futures. How do we sustainably manage our finite resources and recover value from those resources rather than lose those materials into the environment? The third is net zero futures. I like to think of this as more zero and less net, but how do we actually deliver the rapid emissions reductions required for a sustainable future in a socially and economically sustainable way? Healthy futures is our fourth. How do we actually manage those risks? So as we're making changes, as we're innovating and evolving, how do we manage the risks to humans and ecosystems while making and prioritizing environmentally sustainable transitions? And finally, this is about inclusive and prosperous futures. We can't have a situation where the environment challenges then make changes which are then damaging to our social structure. This is tied to our social responsibility at the University of Manchester. So environmental sustainability has to be fair and just and enable thriving communities to continue to grow. Finally, I'd like to close by saying, while this is about I'd like to close by saying that while this is about the University of Manchester, it's not just about the University of Manchester. Our work is going to have a global reach, and it has to work with those communities. We want to be a beacon of excellence here that builds on our success in acting on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and our standing in this space is both a significant feather in the cap, but also a responsibility. We need to enable change, especially with our external stakeholders and citizens of the world. So now I'm going to turn it over to three people who really know what they're talking about, some specific examples on where we are and how we want to make a difference. And first up is Carly Mclaughlin from the Tyndall Manchester. So she's director of Tyndall at Manchester.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining us. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about net zero, and I'm going to try and make 3 points. So Mike's stolen one already, which is that we should be talking less about the net and more about the zero, that it's not all about carbon, and that it has to be central to everything that we do to really deliver it. So across those 3 areas, in terms of less about the net and more about the zero, we talk about net zero now as if we've been framing things like this for a really long time, but actually it's a very new framing to talk about net zero. Very recently, we were talking about an 80% cut in emissions by 2050. And this framing of net zero mashes together your actual emissions reductions with offsetting or negative emissions. And I think it causes all kinds of risks that we can talk about more, but it certainly has pushed it up the agenda and kind of captured people in that everybody is now talking about net zero. More on that in a moment. But work that we've done in Tyndall Manchester, particularly colleagues Alice Larkin and Kevin Anderson, is really focused on the importance of carbon budgets. So the total carbon that you emit on the point to getting to zero is what really matters for the level of climate change that we'll face. And so really pressing that it is mainly about emissions reductions, really getting emissions down and not thinking about this net zero date all the time and not getting too distracted by that. The second one, that it's not all about carbon. I think that's why Sustainable Futures is a really exciting development in the university, because carbon, I think, has kind of become a bit the poster child of environmental protection, much to the irritation of people that work on things other than carbon, because you can decarbonize in ways that are very unsustainable in terms of wider environmental impacts. And also the way that we decarbonize will have hugely different impacts for people across different parts of the world, for people even within their own communities within Greater Manchester. There's different levels of capacity to decarbonise and different levels of responsibility for that. And so we need to make sure that we're looking much more broadly than just carbon, and all these themes across sustainable futures, all these challenge areas helps us to do that. And then the third point about it being central to all that you do, I think, work that we've done with Greater Manchester Combined Authority about building in a co-benefits tool for looking at decisions more in the round, work that we've done with the band Massive Attack to look at decarbonising live music. What's clear across all these kinds of quite different contexts is it's such a huge challenge. It's so fundamental to what we do that it can't be an add-on that somebody in the green department deals with. It's got to be part of your central vision and part of every decision that you make. And I suppose that's what I'm excited to do through Sustainable Futures, to work with more partners to really make sure that we can challenge on that transformative level to say, how do we really get emissions down quickly in a way that is genuinely sustainable and just? And with that, I'll pass over to the next speaker.
Next up is Hugh Coe, and Professor Hugh Coe is Director of the Manchester Environmental Research Institute.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everybody to this launch event. It's fantastic to see so many people here. Mike asked me to say a few words from my perspective, and I guess the challenges are huge and many, and I thought I'd focus on environmental pollution, really, really to contrast, pick up on some of the things that Carly has just said, that we have to worry about a wider range of issues than simply carbon alone, and the relationships between all of those. Environmental pollution affects our health, it affects the health of our planet. It cuts across all of these challenge areas that Mike has described earlier, and it's really sits at the heart of what Sustainable Futures is seeking to be about. Manchester has a hugely successful track record in many of these areas. Mike's own area, in the area of plastics, has been hugely important from the perspective of the circular economy and reuse of plastics in a sustainable way. That's married to the work that's gone on in seed in the past, thinking about plastics in our rivers and quantifying those, thinking about the ultimate fate of plastics in the ocean, in using work that's gone on in earth sciences, and linking to the health effects on our heart and other organs, work that's going on in FMBH, so a truly collective activity. Work that Dave Polyer and colleagues have done on water quality over the last 20 years, focusing initially on the geochemistry, but realizing that an understanding of the geochemistry alone is not going to solve the problem. So really bringing in partnerships from around the world, including governmental organizations, farming organizations, to understand the risks and to develop local solutions to reduce the health burden on populations across the whole of Southeast Asia. It's those sorts of activities that are exemplars of how we've got to draw multidisciplinary work together. My own work and the work of my colleagues on air pollution has grown hugely over the last decade. We've thought about some major problems. Everybody knows about Dieselgate. One of the things that Manchester led on was a recognition that wood burning in our homes, as in city environments, was actually leading to a very large amount of pollution, and that has subsequently grown into a major policy question and social question, really, of how we persuade people away from these sorts of behaviours into cleaner technologies and adopting them down the track. We have to bear in mind that's a classic example of how technologies were implemented and promoted from the perspective of reducing carbon, both Dieselgate and wood burning stoves, and have led to other environmental consequences that we've now got to deal with. And Sustainable Futures, as Mike and Carly have already said, needs to be about building those things together in a holistic way so that we don't make those same mistakes again when we develop technologies or develop policies that are targeted at one specific thing and don't consider the whole. Our work on the health impacts of pollution is really growing very quickly, bringing together colleagues thinking about heart disease and cancer in FMBH with pollution problems, and starting to see how the environmental consequences and the perturbations on those are affecting public health. And of course, as Mark said earlier on, that's not just a question of health for everybody, but it is a question of health for everybody. It's about how we reduce inequity across the health of populations, both within our own cities and across the globe. Lastly, I'll finish with one thing at the very top level. Most recently, our sister platform, the digital platform, has brought together, Digital Futures platform has brought together a suite of partnerships around the environmental, digital and environmental area. And that's ended up with the award of an £8 million digital solutions hub led by Richard Kingston. So that provides a hugely beneficial possibility for the digital solutions platform to work alongside the Sustainable Futures platform and policy at Manchester to really deliver on some of these very big issues going forward. So I'm hugely excited. I hope you are as well. And I very much hope that you get on board with this new platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugh. Third one up is Professor Frank Boons, who's director of the Sustainable Consumption Institute.
Yes, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Carly and Hugh, for the introductions. I'll try to be complementary to that and talk a little bit more about the how rather than about the what. Because I think that Manchester has something, quite unique to offer in the sense of how we actually move towards solutions. So my perspective starts from a very simple sort of observation. So if we look at plastics, for instance, they were introduced like 70 years ago, at a sort of commercial scale. So nobody 70 years ago imagined that it would be possible, that we would find plastic waste in the bellies of birds and fish. Likewise, nobody intended, over a century ago, when we started replacing horse and carriage with automobiles, that we were sort of engaging with the technology and practices that would change the global climate. So I think that one of the things that we are very conscious of in Manchester is that the solutions that we want to develop now and that we need to develop to meet all those challenges, we need to make sure that we don't make those kind of mistakes, or at least we try to avoid as much as possible those kind of mistakes. And the mistakes up to a certain point, because those technologies have also brought us a lot of very positive things. So there is a question of how to sort of balance the good or to find the good without having the bad, let's put it that way. So we talk about it in terms of responsible innovation. This is an approach that has been developed, across the European Union, but there's several people within the university, including myself, working on that. We use that in our work on plastics, and we're now using that again in the work on critical materials such as lithium, which we need for a lot of our green technologies as a resource, as a new resource. And that's that kind of process which we do not just as researchers, but in collaboration with our industry partners and societal partners, is a process of working towards solutions in a systemic and interconnected way. And this is really something that we are, I think we're really quite good at it in Manchester, but we know that we can be much better at it, and we really want to work together with sort of societal partners and industry to improve in that sense. So what does this mean? It means that we work on development of new technologies and practices of production and consumption in a way to avoid those unintended negative effects that the others have been talking about. And in doing that, it's really important to engage not just with sort of the engineering side of things, but also to look at the social sciences and humanities. So, and just to give you a flavor of the latter, humanities, because sometimes it's looked at as, it's quite remote from contributing to solutions. I mean, we brought in specifically historical approaches, something called learning history, into the work that we did with industry partners and NGOs. We're doing that, around the critical metals. We did that around plastics. And the reason to do that is that by looking at the past and looking at how the use of plastics from its early beginnings into now widespread use, for instance, in medical applications where it saves lives, how that actually came about. And what are the dynamics that come into play to make that such a widespread use of the material? And understanding those dynamics is really important to inform us in how we're developing solutions at this moment for the challenges that we are currently facing. So my last point is around, what should actually be the system that we focus on? And I really think that we should be looking at systems of provision. So, and with that, I mean that we need to look at the systems that we use for providing for food, for mobility, etc. And the reason for that is that in those systems, the questions of resilience, justice, and resource scarcity and well-being, they all come together. So, because one of the main sort of meta challenges, you could say, is that we are not just dealing with climate change or not just dealing with food poverty, we're dealing with all of those challenges. And I think that a lot of the research of the institutes like Mary, Royce, SCI, MUI, so the Manchester Urban Institute and the Global Development Institute, really sort of provide contributions that sort of try to look at multiple challenges. And in doing that, I think we need to think boldly. And for me, thinking boldly means that we should definitely sort of work with industry and with business to solve these kind of problems. But also some of the challenges we need to think even outside the boundary of sort of doing it within our current economic system. So some of the solutions that we have sort of studied and that we know that they work are community-based and are not profit-oriented. And we need to include those in the equation. And I think that researchers at Manchester are really well equipped to do so. That's it from my side, Mike.
Thanks very much, Frank. So we've heard a lot of different perspectives now, and so you have a bit of a sense in terms of our strengths, but we know that you guys have questions, and some of those have already been coming through. And so we're going to turn to a panel session where you can hear not just from us, but also from a lot of those different experts that we work with to try and make decisions that avoid these unintended consequences. To help with that, we're going to be chaired by Professor Colette Fagan, who is Vice President for Research at the University of Manchester.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really proud and very excited that we're launching the Sustainable Futures platform today, and really would just like to thank all the colleagues at Manchester who've worked really collegially to build teams around this, take the agenda forward, and to bring their research excellence and vision to this platform. So let me just briefly introduce the panel members, and then we'll move to some Q&A. So some you've already met. So Mike Shaver is staying on the panel with us as director. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jen O'Brien, who's our academic lead for sustainability in our teaching and learning at Manchester, and some industry partners. So we have industry and external stakeholders. Mark Atherton, that you heard earlier in the opening session, who's the Director of Environment at GMCA. Susan Jay, who's a sector specialist working with RAP UK, which is a charity working with business, government, citizens and other charities to reduce waste and promote sustainability. I'd like to welcome John Pitcher, who's the Director of Industry Standards at MasterCard, who is focused on sustainable materials and recycling in their processes. And Dr. Paul Jenkins, who's Research Director of Beauty and Personal Care Science and Technology at Unilever, which is one of the university's strategic industry partners, and Unilever has a commitment to driving sustainability throughout their activities. So, we've got a few questions coming through, and I'm just going to feed those in as I turn to our panel members. But Paul, I'd like to start with you first, please. If you could say a little bit more about Unilever's ambitions for sustainability as an organisation, and how the platform may help you get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and thank you for the invite to be part of this auspicious occasion. I mean, you've already said that one of Unilever's ambitions is to be the global leader in sustainable business. That's an easy thing to say, but what does it actually mean? For us in Unilever, it really means three things. We want to improve people's health, confidence, and well-being through the use of our products and the impact we make in society. We want to contribute to a fairer and more socially inclusive world, and we want to improve the health of the planet. And I think today the third one of those is very, very pertinent to what we're talking about. The three big things we measure lots of things, but the three big things we've committed to over the next part of this strategy are net zero emissions, and I absolutely take Mike's point about more zero and less net. For all our products from sourcing, so from getting the raw materials to make the ingredients, to make the products, to make the packs, and to get them to the supermarket or Amazon shelf. We want those to be net zero in terms of emissions by 2039. We want to protect and regenerate nature. We use an awful lot of material in our products. A lot of it is carbon. And so we are looking to diversify into more sustainable carbon feedstocks. We already use a lot of plant-based carbon, so from things like palm, but there is such a demand for it to move away from petrochemicals, for example, that we're looking for other sources and other ways to do it, other technologies to take waste and convert it into ingredients. And then the other one, waste-free world. So, a good example here is packaging. We sell lots of liquids. Really, the best way to sell liquids is in plastic bottles. They're lightweight, cheap to manufacture, easy to transport, very safe. But obviously, there's a lot of plastic you produce. So we are committed to essentially, circular plastic. So we will committed to 50% recycled plastic in all our plastic bottles by 2025, I think the date is. And also we're starting to do experiments in other packaging materials. We're just recently doing a trial at the moment using cardboard packaging for laundry and personal care products in the market. So that's kind of what for Unilever, that's what we live our day-to-day life. Of course, we're looking for partners, and obviously the sorts of things that you guys in Manchester do around biodegradable polymers, recycling of packaging, also industrial biotechnology is a way to convert waste matter, renewable waste matter into ingredients that we can use, but also consumer habit change. Everyone knows how to use a shampoo in a bottle, but can you convince them to use a different format? I don't know, maybe a powder in a cardboard box or something. So consumer habit change is also really important, and those are the sorts of things that the Sustainable Futures Institute, I think, is why Unilever is really excited about the future of what we can do together.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Really, really helpful to know the plans and to see targets being set within Unilever. I'd like to move to Susan now, please, to talk a little bit about WRAP, targets, ambitions, and again, how the platform can complement and help WRAP achieve its objectives.
Hi there, and thank you for inviting me to join you on this panel. WRAP, as you said, is a charity, and we have three focus areas really that we're working on at the moment, which is around sustainable plastics, and that's something I'll come back to in a bit more detail. We're also working very hard on sustainable food systems and also looking at sustainable textiles. So those are our key focus areas at the moment. Coming back to sustainable plastics, we've developed the UK Plastics Pact, which was the first of the Plastics Pact in the world, and there are now many, many more popping up all over the globe, and we're interacting with all of those. We work really across the whole supply chain. So our role as an organisation is really to facilitate collaboration and initiatives working across the whole of the supply chain. And that includes the citizens as well in part of that initiative. So what are we doing? What are we aiming for? Our 4 targets for the UK Plastics Pact is first looking at removing the things that are, well, either completely unnecessary or are really problematic. So we're focused very much on single-use plastics and how we can remove those. There are circumstances where there might be material substitutions involved, but we have to be very, very careful about any unintended consequences that might arise as part of that. But also getting rid of the problematic materials that interfere with our ability to both collect, capture and recycle a lot of these materials coming through the system. And then we're looking at improving the recyclability overall, so changing the format of some packaging to ensure it can be recycled effectively, efficiently, and of course, you know, with cost benefits through the system. And then we're hoping at one of our key targets is by 2025 to have achieved 70% effective recycling. So that's raising the UK's plastics packaging recycling rate to 70%. We're at about 51 at the moment. So that's a really significant leap in percentage points to get to by 2025. So clearly a huge amount to do. And then, of course, we're also looking at increasing the amount of recycled content that comes into these products. So we're looking at a much more circular approach in the way we use plastics and making sure we maximize the amount of that material that is cost effectively collected, sorted and recycled back into new products. So those are the challenges that we're really focused on at the moment. But they are, you know, they do present, you know, extreme difficulties and challenges in all kinds of ways. And obviously we hope that in engaging with the university and looking at some of the work you're doing, as well as we work with a lot of other universities across the UK, that we can really help to collaborate on these kind of very challenging issues. And they may be involving not just the technological challenges, of which there are many, but also the economic challenges in terms of actually making these things work, but also the behavioural issues and talking to citizens and understanding what their response is going to be. If we start to say, well, actually, you don't need to engage in one particular behaviour, we're going to move you, for instance, into refill models. Well, what's the approach? What is a citizen prepared to accept? What can they do? What kind of behaviours do we need from them in order to make that work? So we're really thrilled to have Manchester on board as part of that UK Plastics Pact supporters, and really look forward to working with you much more closely over the coming years.
Rookie mistake about muting, apologies. Thanks very much, Susan. So I'm now going to turn to Mark for GMC8. Now, Mark's already set out the stall this morning, so I'm going to take a slightly different tack and bring up a couple of questions from the floor, Mark. So the first one comes from Rachel Locke, that Andy Burnham at the Green Summit talked about drawing on finance for this agenda in a social justice framework approach. What does that mean, if you know the answer, in terms of how GM's approaching the sustainability agenda and the financing of it?
It's a good question, and hi Rachel, thank you for that. I think what Andy was referring to specifically was around the existing funding streams that are focusing on fuel poverty. So we've secured £2.7 million worth of funding that we are passing through to the residents of Greater Manchester to upgrade their homes. These are focusing on homes which are the worst performing, so they're EPC rated D and below. But importantly, it's only eligible to people with an income of less than 30,000. So that there is something that's already happening, almost being directed towards those who are in greatest need. If you add on to that, though, we're in partnership with the social landlords of Greater Manchester who collaborate quite extensively. And I think we've just in the last couple of days put in a proposal to directly support them to do the same sort of thing in social homes. There's two reasons for this. One is obviously the equality and fairness issue that Rachel's raised. But the second is that it picks up on one of the other points around behaviour change. Getting people to make what is quite a substantial change to their home is quite challenging. It requires an awful lot of disruption. It can cost an awful lot of money if you're in that willing to pay bracket and not eligible for a grant. With social homes, we have some ability to be able to control some of that investment, either directly for those homes where local authority is still the owner, or indirectly through those social landlords that we work with quite closely. And it's by working with providers of homes at scale that helps us to do two things. One, it allows us to move from demonstration, which is great, up to the delivery of large-scale decarbonisation, which is really where we need to be. And the second is it allows us to start thinking about finance models which may be novel. So if, for example, we can get social landlords to think around energy generation on their properties and energy storage and creating community energy links where the beneficiaries aren't just the householders, but their neighbours as well, it starts to give people a share in the energy system that they haven't currently got. And I think the proposal is that as people take more interest and ownership of the energy system, they become more engaged with it, and that therefore behaviour is likely to change more easily.
Thanks, Mark. Now, I want to draw Jen into the conversation to say a little bit about education at Manchester, but also to come back to the broader question of education. So, Jen, can you just tell us a little bit about why it's important to integrate the research and knowledge about sustainability into the curriculum and how we teach and learn at Manchester?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Colette, very much. I think because research can't do it alone. I think universities, we need to change the way that we do things. I've not disagreed with anything that's been said this morning, but all the way through, I've just been screaming, where are our students in this discussion? So if you think about it, there are 40,000 students at the University of Manchester alone. And if just a quarter of those students spent half of their time thinking and tackling sustainability challenges, that's a 7.5 million hour resource annually that we could use, we could direct to begin to solve some of these problems. And that's just the University of Manchester. You scale it up nationally, globally, there's this massive, massive resource that we could better deploy. So I truly think that we need to better align our teaching and our learning and our research and get more of our students at all levels involved in real world challenges that affect change, and to do that at scale as well. And ideally, I think we need to do that through our teaching, through our core curriculum. So not all of our students have the luxury, if you like, of undertaking extracurricular activities. And I think that's where we're all really familiar with the idea of research-led teaching. So where our curriculum is shaped by the of-the-moment research and that equips our students to affect change. But I think a slight danger is that infers an almost top-down, literally lecturing our knowledge to students. And I actually think we're missing a trick by not more often co-constructing our insights to the world with our students and other partners too, our cultural institutions, our business partners, our charity partners, but also to do that with mutual benefit. It's one of the things that I think we overlook. So to give you an example, we've been piloting our Living Lab, which brokers applied research between students and organisations who need that insight to affect change. And it's mutually beneficial to all. Our students love it. They get to work in the real world, because of course universities aren't real world, are they? It's a scary assessment. It perhaps pushes them out of their comfort zone to begin with, but I'd argue that good assessment would do that anyway. It's been great for our students' employability. We've had lots of students employed through this opportunity. But moreover, our students' assessment is affecting change at multiple scales. So we've had students that have been looking at, I don't know, hydropower in Zambia, for example, and looking at health equalities in the UK. It gives an opportunity for students to hold us to account as an institution for our sustainability practices, as we are, let's face it, a small city, a small town that can't not have negative impacts on the world that we live in by our sheer size alone. I think one of my personal examples is where a student's research has been used to place beehives across Manchester. It's a student's assessment. It's a core part of what they're doing, but it's actually doing something to affect change. And I think that also gives us space then to capitalise upon our interdisciplinarity. There's been a reoccurring theme today about how many of our sustainability challenges are interlinked. A lot of them we have been addressing for decades, let's face it, and we need to try and look at them differently. So the little exercise that we invited you to take part of at the beginning of our event today it's really simple, and it aims to start a conversation. I love how, if you look at our Twitter, the Sustainable Futures Twitter, lots of people, and thank you so much, have been engaged with the exercise, and they have shared their outputs. It starts a conversation, whether it's critiquing the terms that we're using, whether it's critiquing the linkages between the SDGs and the triple bottom line of sustainable development. But it illustrates the complexity of sustainability and also the opportunities that we have through that multi-scalar interdisciplinary viewpoint. Now, we talk about this all the time in our research. We said it time and time again this morning. We do it much less so in our teaching and learning. And I think that's where the interdisciplinary viewpoints of 40,000 students at our university alone could be much better brought together to affect change. And I confess, through my own work on Creating a Sustainable World, our USIL course, I have learned, I've been in this gig for an awful long time, but listening to social anthropologists working with engineers and mathematicians, reframing some of these ideas, and with no disrespect to proper researchers, with a fluidity and ease and a bravery that, if I'm honest, I wish I had. And I've learned from this interdisciplinary viewpoint. So even our own director, I'm sorry, Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but Professor Shaver, you were generous enough to say that your teaching on Creating a Sustainable World helped you to rethink your polymer science. And you said that you put the social into your one bin to, I always get this wrong, I'm sorry, one bin to rule them all funding application. And I think that in itself is a really good example of how, if we bring research and teaching together in a mutually respectful way, that enables us to co-construct this knowledge. And then we can begin to shed new light on some of these problems that we've been trying to grapple with for an awful long time. Sorry, Colette, you're on mute.
Learning good practice, and we're going to come on to how you change habits in a minute. So we're just going to feed in a couple of questions from the Q&A submissions. So I'm just going to prime Susan, Joe and Paul. In a minute, I'm going to come to you and ask about one thing from your experience about how we change habits. We're getting quite a lot of questions around how you get individuals to habit shift. Mark's already covered some of that in talking about the energy use and refit of social stock in Manchester. So I'd like to come to Mark while you're thinking about habits to ask one of the questions, which is the role of school education and getting the messages through so that we raise awareness, help to change habits at an early stage perhaps, and whether GMCA has any plans to help steer this. And that was from Chris McLean.
Yeah, thank you. Another good question. So the obvious answer is yes, of course, it's incredibly important. And it's important in my view for one particular reason, and that's about pressure. I do believe that if we educate our children, they are most likely to go home and pressurize their parents. Now, whilst education of the young is good for all sorts of reasons, and as I said earlier, it is about preparing them for a very different world that they will grow up and live in. The truth is that the changes that we need to make to meet any form of carbon budget that's been set need to happen in the next 5 to 6 years. And so they won't be in a position of power to be able to do that. Therefore, what we really need to do is change the mindset of people who are already adults, and not just adults, but already in a position to make decisions, and sometimes quite powerful decisions. So if you really want me to answer the question honestly, yes, educating children is always important, but actually utilising them cynically as a lever to be able to get to those people who can actually make the difference and make the change happen is probably the most valuable thing that we can do. So the second part of the question, yeah, are we doing it? Yes, we are. There's a raft of work that's going on around recycling that I didn't mention in my presentation, and I should have done. But there's a big behaviour change programme around recycling for GM. However, our recycling rates remain stubbornly level. And so that tells me that actually telling people what to do isn't enough. We have to try and incentivize them, and I think you'll see some changes coming through from the national government that will help to incentivize change. But we are also working directly with schools, partly as part of curriculum change, but focusing very much on what individual schools can do. So again, it's about action, not words. So we're basically have pulled together a resource pack that is going online that will enable teachers and head teachers and facilities managers within schools to work with their children to decarbonize their estate and to look at the recycling on their estate and to look at the nature and natural environment on their estate. So utilizing education as a tool to deliver action, I think, is the most important piece here, because we haven't got time to wait for them to grow up.
Thank you. So if I pick up the thread then of it's about educating, informing, incentivizing and nudging behaviour. If I could now turn to Susan first, and then I'll come to Joe and Paul to reflect on the incentivizing and nudging that you're able to do through your organisation. What's the key thing?
I think for us, one of the key things actually, and we've learnt over many years, is we've talked to citizens and went through a long period of putting up very practical posters and stickers and all those kind of things that would tell people what they needed to do, and there'd be pictures of a bin and what went in and what wouldn't. And so there was a lot of, I wouldn't like to say too much, but sort of preaching at people about what was the right thing to do. And in fact, that doesn't seem to have really worked that well. And as perhaps Mark said, there is a sort of stubbornness that says, oh, God, that's for somebody else. Doesn't really relate to me. And I think one of the key things that we changed, and I'm afraid I always reflect, because I live in Wales. And so as part of our programme that we've had in Wales, and I have to say we've got very good recycling rates here, is that we've normalised the behaviour. So instead of saying to people, this is what you've got to do, we said, this is what we do. It became what is the normal activity. So instead of pictures of bins and that sort of thing, we've had pictures of beautiful bits of scenery and just said, recycling, it's what we do. So it becomes part of the normative behaviour rather than something other and on top of that you actually do. So it's part of your weekend rugby game. It's part of your trip out into the countryside. It's part of you visiting wherever you're going and part of you being in school. It was just what we do. And so I think that made a huge difference in terms of our approach and thinking. And of course, you have to back that up with making it easier. You have to have the necessary systems and facilities in place, and you've got to make it really, really simple. And then people understand, and then it just seems a better way to engage with your citizens in terms of making them think that actually, if they're not doing it, that somehow they're being left out. So slightly different approach.
Thank you, Susan. And over to you, Joe.
So I think from our side, it is all about how we can incentivise and what we can do to influence our customers, and our customers, from my perspective, are banks, effectively. So what can we do to influence the decisions that banks make? And then downstream from there, what can we do to influence decisions that consumers make? And we've got a number of different tools, if you like, a number of different levers that we can pull. So my role is industry standards. So I can set rules, I can set policies that the banks effectively have to follow. So if we want to say, okay, you've got to work down this particular direction, start using this new, more sustainable material, we can put in policies and plans to incentivize those good decisions or effectively disincentivize the poor decisions. We can set up, to Susan's point, we can enable, we can set up and work with them to help them collect their products at end of life, to have them recycled and reprocessed, rather than standing back saying, it's your problem, you go away and clear it. We can help them and develop it that way. But bringing it back more to the consumer level, we've got tools and products like a carbon calculator tool, so that when a customer spends, they go to Tesco's or Boots or whatever they may buy, we can give them a carbon calculation of the impact of that spend, which can then incentivize them, motivate them to maybe make a better choice next time, maybe shop in a different way. Or if they do have to buy an airline ticket or something like that, which currently is not unavoidable, but in normal world is unavoidable. They're aware of what that impact is, and they've got a tool to maybe offset that, to plant trees, to donate to an NGO, to some way fund back and reduce, if you like, replace some of the damage that they're causing. So we're trying to offer as many carrots as we can rather than the stick. We do have a tool of a stick at the back if we need to, and we can just put out some, this is what you have to do, but we want to bring people with us. And I need to go back to what Mark said. I think it's about looking at the children, the next generation coming up as well, and what's going to motivate them, what's going to incentivize those audiences, rather than necessarily looking at the current incumbents, the maybe my generation, older, who are maybe a bit set in their ways and maybe a bit too old to re-educate. If we start looking at the people that are coming through, get them on board, and then I can speak from experience, having 2 teenage daughters, they're the ones that bring the older people on board as well. So it's about what we can do to really bring all of these different groups together to help them move in the right direction.
Thank you, Joe. And to you, Paul, for the final word on this theme about habits and shifting. Thank you.
Of course. I mean, everyone in the audience is a consumer of our products, so I bet you all have your ideas. If you've got any fantastic ideas on how to do that, then please let me know, because it is a perennial challenge we have to get users of our products to change their habits. What we've learned over a number of years, and many of our competitors are as well, you can't just sell them the sort of environmental benefits. That product has to perform to a level that they think they are getting a very good product that meets their needs. So you've got to get the performance right. You can't give them a substandard performing product and then hope to them to convert to using that product. Repeat usage, they might try it once and then they won't go, they won't use it again. Second, there are ways now to make products which probably do meet all the net zero renewable things, but they will be very expensive. Most consumers, are unwilling or unable to pay that sort of thing. So, going back to sort of inclusion, you want to give them products that are really highly functional at an affordable cost. And then you kind of get the sustainability, for want of a better word, thing as almost a bit of a gift. So let me give you an example. Recently we've launched some shampoos into the market. Historically, we have made shampoos thick by putting in some polymers that come from petrochemical sources, oil-based sources. And recently we've now launched a range which actually do that thickening of the polymer using polymers extracted from citrus fiber waste from the production of oranges and lemons, which gives you the same thing. So we have talked about using them in there, but actually the product performs as well, if not better than our current. It's as affordable. And we just talk a bit about, we've now moved out some, non-renewable carbon, and improved various sustainability metrics from doing it. And that's what we find. If you can do that, then you can really, really get consumers to engage with it. Everyone wants to buy a product that's good for the environment and the planet, but they won't do it at the expense of having a product that doesn't work. Just last point on it, I would absolutely agree with Susan, is you've got to give them a feel-good factor. You can't lecture them. So, things like they can actually see the benefit they've got, or, there's something in it. The Dove bottles that we now use a lot of recycled plastic in, actually, they're not quite, Dove is a brand that is famed for its white bottles. Actually, the recycled plastic ones have a slight sort of mottliness to them. And actually, we purposely left that in to show people that what we are doing is using plastic for the second time. It's perfectly hygienic and safe. And we've made a big thing about it, saying, Dove's to support you, but personally for your particular needs. And the bottle is also kind of, you've got a one-of-a-kind bottle there now. So that those sort of things, can be quite effective as well. But if there was a magic bullet, I'd be a very rich man, I think, by now.
Well, that's, I think, the tie between environmental sustainability and economics. It is a big thing. We've lost our chair, so I'm just going to take over. Colette hadn't bothered to ask me any questions yet, so maybe this was a planned move. But I'm just going to look at a question from Rachel Locke, who is looking for a bit of an answer on a temporarily fixed question. So we've got COP26 in Glasgow coming up very soon, and this is focusing the global effort on addressing some of those climate change challenges. And I guess a bit of a question in terms of what you think COP26 should do. So what do you imagine the most important output from COP26 might be? And I'm going to turn to Jen O'Brien because she called me out earlier. Make her answer this with very little notice.
Oh, thanks for that, Mike, very much. Okay. I'm wondering if it's something that we said that drove Colette away. Oh, gosh, what was the output from COP26? A better world. I mean, I think it's interesting today that we've all talked about challenges. We've all talked about hopes of young people changing things for us. I think one of the things that we need to do is to stand up and recognise quite terrifying world that we are facing and come up with some fair, inclusive actions that means we can change that. It's one of the things I've been a bit disconcerted by is that, sorry, forgive me, my whole family's in isolation with COVID at the moment, so I'm a bit out of breath, do apologise. But I think a real concern that I have had recently is that we're very quick to make noises around needing a better world, but are less brave at times to stand up and face quite terrifying reality that is ahead of us. So for me, COP26, and I'm putting very unrealistic expectations, I appreciate, needs to make some really dramatic moves to change that. Maybe we can throw that question out to the rest of the panel as well. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts.
For sure. So thinking about that, trying to shift the narrative a little bit, what do you guys think the COP26 is going to lead to? And how does that relate to sustainable futures as well? Does anybody want to chip in, or do I pick on someone?
I'll jump in. And first of all, I'm no expert in this field. I'm an expert in payment cards, so I recognise my level. But I think, echoing what Jen said, for me, what we need out of COP is action, not just, to be blunt, politicians coming out saying we're going to do something, but we're going to do it long in the future. We need them to come out and do something and say something and do it now. What that is, I don't know. You guys are far more qualified to say what that should be than I am. But it's clear that we need them to be doing something. And at the moment, there's a lot of sitting on hands and almost kicking it down the road so that it's the next politicians or the next generation's problem. And that's just, it's got to end. I think we've done that for too long. So however that comes about, whether it be our government sitting here in the UK or collectively all of the governments together come up with something real, fantastic. But we need action now rather than just people talking at nice summits in Glasgow.
I'm recognizing in terms. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Susan. No.
I was just going to add to that, because I think certainly from my perspective, having watched these various COP meetings over the years, they've always felt like they were in isolation. They were talking to themselves, it's the sort of echo chamber that you get. And I'd like to think that all the various countries that are engaged in this would go back and engage with their own citizens and actually listen to them, because it's all very well to come up with fancy sound bites or the odd initiative about, everyone having a ground source heat pump, which, commentators then immediately dismiss as being unrealistic and too expensive and actually won't save you any money. So nobody's ever going to do it, And I'd rather they came up with longer term solutions that people could feel positive about and really engaged with and actually act on quite a personal level, and it might be quite small things which individually actually don't make a huge difference, but collaboratively do make a massive difference. So I really think I'd like to see more engagement with what's being talked about in the various government offices and departments, and even in universities, actually reaching out a little bit more into the world, as it were, right across the board.
And I think that's really an important point, because we sometimes get paralyzed by the immensity of this situation. That when I had talked earlier about wanting sustainable futures to be a bit celebratory, as well as recognizing the urgency of this, we've got to be able to do that across the board. And that's recognizing the connectivity between all these challenges, right? And so when we can motivate students to feel that they're making a difference from the teaching and learning front and deliver solutions for our stakeholders, the community is then pulling all in the same direction. And so while it is a research platform, it is a platform that really is about connecting impact across the board and trying to ensure that people feel motivated to make change instead of feel that their change doesn't matter. Colette is back. I'm not sure if she is back in chair mode, but I will turn it over to her in case she is. And she's muted again.
I'm back, but I thought we were coming towards the end of the time for this session.
We are.
Okay. So I'm sorry I dropped out with some internet connection problem on my laptop. I'd like to thank the panel members for their contributions. It's given us a lot to think about in terms of how we deal with the complexities and the interactions between different parts of the environmental sustainability challenge. And I'd just like to pass now to Mike for some closing words about the platform. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much. There's lots of other questions that were raised. We are going to collect those and feed them back, because I think it's really important that this serves as a platform for us to reflect back on our own practices and what we're going to do moving forward. For me, I think it was a learning experience, even though I'm kind of a bit of an expert in this area, because all of these different expertise have to align and work together to be able to deliver on that. We appreciate the challenges, right? So mysterious anonymous attendee asking about our own internal practice will say that we've actually integrated into the Sustainable Futures Management Board people who are responsible for developing that practice at the university. And so it's about aligning our operations and our teaching and learning and our research on that front. And so you'll see some interesting things coming out in terms of our plans for reducing carbon emissions and how that is balanced against single-use plastic use on campus. But most importantly, it's really that this is a time to engage. It's the beginning of something. We're in a period of transition, and this is a chance for you to become more involved in this program moving forward, integrate, follow us, try and contribute your own perspectives. And if you look in the chat, you'll see some links on how you can follow us on various social media practices. So for now, it's just thank you so much for attending. Thanks to everybody who participated today, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the day.